There's a plausible reason. There's a plausible.
Very folks to Capital Sports 3.0. My name is Alan Moore, and luckily I haven't muted myself yet, but it will happen. Trust me about that. We've had a huge day of sports. We have had Formula One racing to discuss. We had a lot of interest in football as well. We're going to speak about football later on in the show as well, especially football in Africa and in Kenya, because we have an absolutely superb guest. You're really going to want to hear what he has to say, because I met him a couple of years ago, and he genuinely inspired me about what is going on in Africa and sort of the how to rebuild footballers after their career. Something that many football associations and professional footballers associations want to do. They're doing it in Kenya, and basically doing it very well as well. This week, there were more developments, of course, in the Conor Benn case, and I'm going to play a clip from last week, which got a lot of views, a whole lot of views last week, a lot of shares, and a lot of comments as well. Right after it, Isel Cody, my co-host, she is going to give the update on, because an awful lot has happened in the space of a week. So this was from last week's show, myself, Keane, Iselt, and Rich Poxon. So sit back, enjoy for the next few minutes, and then Iselt will have you all to herself.
There's a plausible reason.
Rich, there is that point, because with VADA, it's the voluntary. So it's basically you agree to submit to it. So basically, you'd be a right idiot to do something if you're being tested. Like, for example, Artur Beterbiev is being tested by, there's a whole range of like top Anthony Yard are all in the system, or in their testing system. Well, we all know that like doping is a very, very advanced science, and you have to be really dumb to be caught. Rich, the question would ask you, how many clever boxers are there?
I don't know the answer to that. But if they're not that clever, or they're not clever enough, they'll go out and find somebody who is. I mean, I think if you can get really complicated looking at this case, but let's have a look at things simply, Alan. As you know, I like cycling, and I go out and ride my bike, even today when I was freezing to death. But I'm an old man now. I'm 50 now, so I'm an old man. Alan and Israel, you check my Strava every day, and all of a sudden, like, wow, Richard's in top 5 on Strava in Yorkshire. How's he doing that at 50? Wow, he's beating everybody. And then you see a couple of pictures on Instagram, and you think, wow, Richard's got really lean. His body's completely different. His body's completely changed. And then after that, you see that I've palled up with a doctor who specialises in private testosterone replacement therapy. And then you look into this doctor, and this doctor does loads of podcasts talking about everybody at Richard's age in cycling's doping. Everybody's doping. It's easy to beat the testers. It's simple. It's easy. And then Richard goes on and enters 2 races somewhere in Italy or Spain or wherever, where they have a bit of occasional testing, and he fails 2 tests. Would anybody, hand on heart, if I come on this show, Alan, and went, Alan, believe me, mate, please, I wouldn't do it. Sorry, I always pronounce your name right. It's wrong, sorry. Isel. And I went, please believe me, honestly, I haven't done it. Ignore that my body's completely changed. Ignore that my performances have gone through the roof. Ignore that my pal, this doctor, has done his best to make himself sound as dodgy as he can possibly sound. Ignore that we've all come off social media. Ignore all that. Oh, and also ignore 2 failed tests. Ignore that. Honestly, don't you believe me? Who would, hand on heart, sit on this screen now and look at me and go, yeah, I think he's telling truth? Nobody. Alan, you don't have to lie. Nobody would believe it.
Because of the 4 of us here, I'm the one who sat literally across the table from Gregory Rodchenkov, and him crying and holding my hands and saying, I was set up, I didn't do anything. And I went back to the agency who commissioned me to do a research and an article. I was like, yeah, I spiked the story, I don't like it. I gave him all the materials and I don't like it. Even though I've been told by police, I've been told by coaches that he's as dirty as can be, but he was so convincing at that moment. But you know what? It was fool me once, and that was it. And I would likely say no, Rick. Sorry, I don't know, but
it's just, if something doesn't look right on every level, then how can it be right? And Isel's just made a really good point. There's a really, even forgetting Conor Benn for a second, forget whether he's innocent or guilty for a second. If we look at the overall behaviour around this case, there's an incredibly dangerous precedent being set, which is we do not care whether you are clean or dirty. We don't care. We're going to find a way to make it happen. Don't matter whether you're juice to girls. We're not interested. We're going to find a way. Which, you know what? If that's what they want to do, that's fine. But then please don't do any interviews on social media crying about when boxers have got hurt or crying when they've died, or because you can't do both. You do one or you do the other. And if UKAD don't do anything in this case, or the boxing board or whoever's got jurisdiction, don't pick it up, because ultimately this all comes down to two boring words, as his elder says as a lawyer: strict liability. It's in his system, and that's that. If they don't do anything on this, then for me, anti-doping, but worldwide you could say, but definitely in Britain, anti-doping is dead in Britain, because you can't have promotional companies saying that promoter, his boxer's dirty, he's been found, he should never box again. I'm talking about sending him to prison. Or my kid, no, he's been in here and he's cried, and oh God, my kid won't do it. It's a complete nonsense. And if nothing happens in this case, whether there's a full listen, even if there's a full and frank investigation by board and UKAD, and they go, do you know what? We don't think he were. Even if that happens, but people feel there has been a proper process, we'll all still suck a lemon, but there's been a process. At the moment, there's been absolutely no process, and we're just being told, well, this is what it is, and accept it. And for that to happen, why would a boxer pay for VADA testing? Why would a boxer, if you could come into your changing room after all, before you're going to box, and say we want a sample, just say no? What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah. Issa, go on. Yeah, I'm going to come to Keane, but Issa, jump in.
I would just say, let's not forget as well, at the start of, with COVID, every year blurs into one. So I'm going to say the start of last year, at one stage during the course of last year, obviously prior to these tests, the WBC basically there were 3 boxers, I think, at risk due to the fact that they hadn't signed up to the clean boxing program, and one of the clean boxing program. One of them was Conor Benn, who they were basically saying, you haven't signed up yet, and it was kind of treated like, oh, I've signed up now. So I don't want to say that that's indicative, but if you're not the first to sign up, now let's also remember by the same token, there are lots of dirty athletes across various sports who are signed up to various testing programs, and Lance never failed a test kind of thing. But it's a very dangerous precedent for the sport. It's worrying. And we have returned to this week. I did not think on the 5th of October, when I was getting ready it was 3 days before the scheduled fight between Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn, that on the 5th of March, I would still be talking about the fallout from that day, which was obviously the fight. The news that Conor had at that point failed 1 test, and subsequently we learned it was 2 tests, and the fight obviously ultimately got postponed. During the course of this week, we have moved a step further in the story, with Conor Benn following the WBC statement in which they set out their understanding as to how he had failed these various tests, which basically set out that they felt it was overconsumption of eggs or egg-based products which produced this failing, despite Conor's suggestion being that it was actually flaws in the testing process, something which they did not accept. This week, following the WBC statement, Conor Benn released a subsequent statement in which he essentially criticised the findings of the WBC, while still pointing to the fact that they had found him innocent and exonerated him, which they really didn't seem to have actually done, but that is what he was holding true to at the moment, but yet still criticising them because he feels that the flaws in the testing system were the consequence, which resulted in his failed tests. And in that front, he is suggesting that there were delays in between testing of one sample in particular, which was tested on a number of occasions before a positive finding, and also suggesting that his representative was not allowed to be present or prevented from being present when the B sample was opened, which obviously leads to we haven't been told what the B sample finding was, but one can infer from that, if he's suggesting there was a flaw there, that the sample came back with the same result, and obviously they are split from the same test, so it's hardly shocking. But Conor coming out and saying this, and also coming out and being very vocal this week in his criticism of the British Board of Boxing Control, and suggesting that he will now proceed to sue an almost broke body for the money he would have made from the Ben Eubank purse, which is some 3 million or so pounds, and which will likely, if he does bring proceedings against the British Board of Boxing Control, will likely put them out of business. Has just been another wild and really unfortunate week for the sport of boxing. It's left boxing in a very, very difficult position. It's left the regulation of the sport in a difficult position. And we still understand that UKAD, who are the United Kingdom anti-doping body, the national doping body of the UK, where Ben would have originally have been licensed prior to relinquishing his license to the British board, they still have not received the findings or the documentation that was sent on to the WBC. So essentially, we are still accepting that the WBC are going to have no issue with providing ranking points and restoring Ben to the rankings. And it now looks like we're likely to see him back in the ring in the near future, just licensed under a different licensing board. So it's obviously highly unlikely to be the British board. And even this evening, in the last couple of hours, we have seen Manny Pacquiao's management come out and say that they would give Ben the benefit of the doubt, which obviously suggests that they may be looking to make a fight in that regard. And it's just a very disappointing time for the sport, because whatever about the WBC statement and how woefully inadequate and woefully upsetting it is for a governing body to essentially, when they didn't agree with Ben's 270 odd page arguments about the testing flaws, to then effectively give him a different result and say they're not suggesting that Ben's nutritionists or lawyers or any of his team came up with it was eggs defense. It actually has been stated now by Ben and by the WBC that it was the WBC's experts who came up with this defense, which is a really worrying position for the sport to be in. And unfortunately, I think this, I'm going to just beep out the word I was thinking, show is going to rumble on for a considerable period. And I think the damage is going to continue to be done to boxing because of the fact that the story, unfortunately, is not going to end anytime in the near future.
Aoife, on that, I mean, I know you want to say shit show, but it has given boxing a complete and utter black eye. And this is not a joke. It's a real embarrassment for boxing. And speaking with people back home this past week and people in England as well, and actually my former coach in Germany, and he watched last week, and that particular segment he watched, and he said he couldn't believe how, when he read into it, he said they just let him off so easy and he's going to go back and box again. But as he said to me, he said, Alan, we knew a lot of boxers in Germany who were doing dirty stuff. And I'm not going to name, just two guys that I want to name. They all went on to win world titles, and we knew that they were doped to the gills. And it was just given as a norm. So what can a clean boxer do, Isolt, in this case?
You see, the problem is that what this message sends out there, that's the problem. It's the message it sends out in a sport with consequences like boxing. Doping in any sport is awful, because fairness is the main foundation of sport. But in a sport where you have potentially fatal consequences, there is no excuse. And even if, like Conor Benn, I think, was making the argument that, he could have just taken his 6-month ban and been done with it, but he wanted to clear his name. And I just think the thing is, his name hasn't been cleared. No. He's been given an excuse by a rankings body who essentially are going, well, we want him to fight because he's going to make us money in the long term. So why not? In terms of he'll be fighting and eventually paying portions of his purse to the WBC. And it just, I suppose the other issue which I find really difficult is if you're a clean boxer, you're looking at this going, why am I bothering? And I completely appreciate one of the things Rich brought up last week, which was so important, is that UKAD have an incredibly difficult time of, they don't have the resources, they don't have the money, they don't have the time to test boxers adequately. And what if boxers now turn around and go, no, we don't want to be tested by you, which is entirely plausible. And we also need to remember, UKAD were so out of sync with what was going on in sport boxing that, and I made this point online earlier today, after Tony Bellew had retired for over a year and his retirement fight was quite well publicised, they were contacting him because they didn't realise he'd retired. They hadn't updated their own records. So they're not, this is why VADA are considered the gold standard, because they're an independent body that, yes, they are being funded to do this, but they're an independent body. And if a governing body is basically throwing them under a bus by saying, no, we're not questioning your testing, but we're going to give this person an excuse, it takes all faith out of it.
Even at professional ranks, if it's an Olympic sport, it immediately falls under WADA. So boxing falls under WADA, even professional boxing. So there's no excuses that the British Boxing Board of Control, who govern professional boxing overall in the UK, they should be in control of it. So this is what I couldn't understand it. And we can blame, Anissa, let's put it this way. I always objected when people blamed UCAD or WADA. I'm like, wait, hold on. Stop blaming the testers. It's like blaming the police for...
But if you get caught speeding...
It's not the police doing it. Well, sometimes in England it's the police doing it, but it's like, sorry, but like, there's a limit.
If you're caught speeding, you are prosecuted for speeding, and you can't go, well, like, I think I was okay to do that in that area, or there was a reason for it. It's a simple, you were over the speed limit. That's the rationale. It's very straightforward.
Hold on. In Ireland, if your father is a politician, or if you went to the right rugby school.
Well, I'm doing this in the sense of there's a speed camera there. Okay, let's try it again. There's a speed camera. The camera tells you you're over a certain speed. You get the summons in the post. It's quite straightforward. I also think we need to remember here that the other issue, the WBC, let's remember, this is the governing body who wanted to give Jake Paul a ranking had he won in Saudi Arabia. I think it's the message it sends to clean athletes. And I was listening to a podcast this week where the editor of Boxing News is the host, and it's the Boxing News podcast, unsurprisingly. He was talking and he brought up Shelby Houlihan, who we've obviously discussed at length.
You mentioned her last week as well.
Yeah, I mentioned her last week. And then he went through the points in the finding, which basically said why her excuse of the pork burrito, which was meant to be a beef burrito, which supposedly had uncastrated wild boar in it, why it was found that it wasn't plausible. And he's going through the detail. And the various, I think it was 8 reasons they used to go, this is not a likely chance of having happened. And you go, that was so methodical. And what's happened in the Ben case is he sent in his 270 pages and WBC have gone, no, we don't accept any of that. However, how about eggs? How would that work for you? Because it's facilitating a reasoning. And that's not their job. Their job is to get the results and they're a governing body. They're a rankings association. They're a federation within it. They're not the anti-doping body. And like for them to turn around and give him a reason for the contamination is totally inappropriate. Also, I think it's very worrying that he's threatening to sue the British Board of Boxing Control because they don't have the money to defend that sort of claim. And I think
this is the thing, it's a good question, because this is the thing that with these governing bodies, like WADA, with UCAD, they when money comes into it, they back down or do a deal. And this is the thing that it's seen over and over again. And I can tell even once in UCAD, as I was told directly from UCAD guys who are working here, helping Rosada clean up. Well, they did clean up, but they cleaned up in terms of money. And I mean, no, and in fairness, they did some very, very good things. But as one of the guys told me, he said there was a very famous track and field athlete, female in the UK, who was caught with something in her system. Before she knew it, so they took the sample, and before they got it to the lab, it would take like so many hours to get there. Wherever before it got to the lab, said her lawyer was already under the UCAD and had sent in saying, "Wait, hold on, you did that wrong," and they picked on every single point. And as you said last week, you put in everything you have into the case and say, "Look, it's these. If it's not this, it's this, and so on." And she got off simply because UCAD were thinking, "Christ Almighty!" The former UCAD director, head of UCAD, sorry, panicked and said, "We can't do this." And they phoned WADA and said, "Look, what can we do?" WADA, and as he said, he was there on the conference call, and WADA said, "Let her walk, but now target test her." and go after as much as possible. And that's what they did. But athletes aren't dumb. Athletes are not dumb, because then this athlete went off to a place in Africa where there was no testing. So it's, Isa, boxing's going to recover. You said that last week. Boxing's going to recover. Boxing's going to go on. Boxing's going to
I don't know if boxing recovers. Boxing just carries on regardless. Like I saw tonight, Big Baby Miller, who we all know was going down the injectable route with his doping, obviously, which stopped him proceeding in the planned fight with AJ, which led to Andy Ruiz fighting AJ in Madison Square Garden. He has fought obviously since his ban, but I saw another fight for him being announced tonight. It's just a case of boxing doesn't learn, or boxing just doesn't care enough. And that's a huge issue, because yes, everyone is in uproar over it, but this has gone on since last October. We're now in March. And fundamentally, the reality is, when Conor Benn next gets in a ring, which I expect will be in the next few months, there will be huge eyes on him. And it's basically free publicity for him in a very weird way, because he'll go on to have a career fighting maybe the likes of Manny Pacquiao or those kind of fighters who are on their way out. He probably won't be going to the highs he felt he would be going to, but he'll continue on. The sport will continue on, and perhaps the sport will be damaged in a way that it may not recover from, and potentially the British board could find themselves in a position which they will not recover from. And maybe that won't be the worst thing in the world if the British Board of Boxing Control needs to seriously be reformed or reconstituted. But it's a very, very difficult position to put boxers and the British board in, because there isn't another board there. And
No, you're right. You're right.
When cycling hit its lows, and its real lows, they had to clean out huge amount of people.
True, and look, basically they cleaned out one part of it and then boosted another part. And as we saw, and we brought this up, and we did say it straight up to Thierry Villery. They went, and this is something we all sort of asked a question of, and I asked with Uli Flume as well. Was it basically an anti-Anglophone or anti-English thing? Because they certainly didn't clean up French, Spanish, or Italian cycling. The same kind of dopers are still going and still being lauded, and the Dutch and Belgians who are doped to the gills are lauded as well, and the Slovenes, excuse me. But anyway, a couple of comments from that clip last week, so I'll just run them by you and just get two of them, just get your feedback on them. One is that the British Boxing Board of Control, by not calling the fight off, is clearly at fault. This is from someone called Dealer, so we won't read into that.
They did call it off. They said they came out. Now, obviously it was last minute and they knew the story was going to break, but ultimately they said they wouldn't license it. Just to be fair to them, it wasn't done. It wasn't done soon enough. That's
it. That's exactly it. Because you know yourself, you had tickets, you were booked to go across. So we, like, you personally
still haven't convinced Ryanair to give me my money back. But you know.
Good luck with that. Goes on to say, if what Conor Benn has now come out with is true, then he needs to clean all out, because the next boxer might not have the funds or backing to fight any case. He said, for me, the levels that he failed at need to be released. Also, why did he not fail?
Levels do not matter. Levels should never matter.
There is people want to say, well, look, if it was slightly over the limit, it was this
two tests. If it was one test and it was a tiny amount that could have been contaminated from another area, but he's suggesting the levels were high enough for him to be contaminated on 2 occasions.
Yeah, so he goes on to say that all these tests and dates need to be released. The governance of boxing is a true joke.
July and September. Yeah, so we've got it.
I do agree that the promoters also have a responsibility too, but not as much as the governing body. So again, pressure on the governing body. I understand that, but I don't quite agree with it in that sense, that I do think it's the boxers and their people that they're working with. That's the people who we need to just get rid of out of sports. Sports, not just boxers, of course. Hayden Duchesne, I'm glad I speak that because Canadian name, says, if you're caught with a banned substance in your system, you should be banned even if taken involuntarily. It's a banned substance, period. If it's found out to have been taken accidentally, then you serve a smaller ban. What is the point of having a banned list if you can simply talk your way around it? The athlete alone is responsible for what goes into his or her body. 4-year ban if you're caught doping, 2.5 years for involuntary or accidental doping. How are you on that, Isel? Does that
I'm very good on that. That makes perfect sense. They're short of Unless the only time I would have any sort of leeway here is if there is a substance where if something is not on a product labeled correctly and that product has been cleared as okay to take or use. But even when athletes go to, like, if you're going to Mexico, you would be telling your athletes to be wary of beef, which is you're not telling them to be looking at labels. You're saying, here's an entire product you need to be wary of, because we know that to fatten up the animals, we have clenbuterol used in the food production system. So you have to be wary of that. The onus is on the athlete to educate themselves, to be familiar with the listing, similar to when we obviously have had some well-known tennis stars who have taken certain substances and not realized they were on banned lists. What we do is we say, though, if there is a case where something is in a product and it should not have been, and you could have had, it's no fault liability because of the fact that you say, no matter what you had done, no matter what way you had looked at this, you could not possibly have foreseen this, and it was entirely accidental. Then they have to look on a case-by-case basis and go, well, should you have been wary? But let's say you get your normal protein powder and everything on it is an okay substance. You're not going off and testing your protein before you take it, but everything suggests, everything suggests you should be okay. Then we're in a different story. But I think the whole point of having an anti-doping regime is when doping, and that doesn't just mean you're going off trying to enhance your performance. When a substance that is on the banned list is in your system, that's the line. And we go, there's going to be a ban here. The ban starts at 4 years, and then you can chip away to get it reduced, but it starts at 4, and we work back.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. It makes sense, and Mr. Duchesne is right with what he said as well.
It was very well put there.
Yeah, I think it was structured well. And I think that, like, if it's there, it's there. It's kind of, I do understand how this works, because I'll tell a very quick little anecdote about sports nutrition, because many years ago I worked in sports nutrition, developed sports nutrition. So a lot of them, I visited different factories in Ireland, Poland, Hungary, in Russia, in Germany, and I went behind the scenes and saw how they mixed the powders and poured the drink. I saw everything how it was going on. In a huge supplier who actually make a lot of the big brands, like, basically it says like it's an Irish brand or a British brand, but they produce it because it's cheaper. They produce it in Hungary or Poland. That's really huge, massive amounts, and they get all the protein powder in from China, for example. So they put it in and pack it up, and there's all different grades and different levels of the protein. Now, I was watching them mix. So gigantic. I don't know how many kilos, but well over 100 kilos of big vat that they're mixing. Powders are poured in, different mixes are put in, and I saw this like about the size of my hand, and black. I'm thinking, is that like some sort of clotting of because they were pouring in, it was like going to be strawberry. So they're pouring in strawberry or something. I was like, is that chocolate or something? He goes, oh, 1 second. He leans in, scoops it out, and it was some gigantic bug. A gigantic bug. And I'm like, oh, but he didn't get all of it. He didn't get all of it out. So I know how contamination works. And that was up. Now, another thing, Isla, and the final part of this one is, went to the next one, that was then in Hungary, went up in Poland, and one that produces huge, I mean, I'm telling you, like, a lot of brands that people are using in Ireland or in the UK or America, or not America, but in Europe, they're producing in Poland, for example. And this was a brand. They put a mix in with stuff that was banned. This was for like guys who were serious bodybuilders, and it was for mass gain. And the stuff that was in it, you basically, it'll put hair in your chest, and that's just if you're a woman. It'll take the hair off your chest if you're a man. It was dangerous stuff that they were putting into the mix. So they mixed around, and they cleaned it. They emptied it out, and they started the next mix. The next mix was just a normal protein, 25 grams out of 30 in a spoon protein. And I said, he's not going to wash it out. They're going, we don't have time. So that's contamination. And also, this was open, and they were mixing stuff in different vats. So it's powder. It travels. Now, Isla, sorry, that's what I'm going to say on that. Now, we'll go ahead. Go on. You did the last say.
I'm going to make, it's not actually a sports-related comparison, but there's always the way where you have products. So let's say you're getting something like oats, okay? There's one well-known Irish brand. They produce regular oats and they produce their gluten-free oats. Their gluten-free oats are produced in an entirely different place, because even if they go in and do all the cleaning and everything else, they cannot guarantee they will come out, they will be gluten-free by cross-contamination, not being made together, by being in the same place. So it's the same when you have products may contain traces of nuts, and you're looking at the list of ingredients going, but there's nothing here that's nut-based. Oh, it was in a kitchen where there were traces of nuts. Things get cross-contaminated. That does happen. But for you to be testing positive twice in the space of 3 months.
I'm not excusing them. I'm not excusing them. I'm not excusing them. Okay. And a couple minutes, I'm going to bring in Brian Wesaala. But however, first I'm going to just have a quick look at next week's rugby. Of course, huge match for Ireland, for Scotland as well. That's the old. Sorry, we should update that. So the first games. Now, just give me just one moment, because we were hoping to have Andrew Flint on, but he's in a big sulk today. So
don't worry, we're going to come to that topic soon. There's
still
an hour on. Roy Keane is still on TV.
So basically, Italy are playing. It's at 3:15. It should be 3:15. That Italy against Wales. That is on Saturday, and then England and France on Sunday. That is at 5:45. Ireland playing Scotland on Sunday at 4 p.m. So quickly, okay.
I think we've got the time slightly wrong there. Are Ireland, not Scotland, at 3 p.m. on Saturday?
3 p.m. Irish time, 4 p.m. CET.
On Saturday, though.
On Saturday? No, Sunday.
Yeah. Are you sure?
Ireland playing Sunday in Scotland, yeah.
Oh God, I've misplanned my entire weekend. Thanks for that.
I'm happy with that. No, the first two games, because Italy play Wales in Rome,
and that is a real cracker. That is.
I think it's going to be the best match. That's going to be the match of the weekend.
I'm most excited about. I think there is a really good chance that after seeing how Italy have played, and normally with Italy, they start a tournament. We've discussed this. They start a tournament on a high, and as the defeats get wider and wider, they start on a downward crest. Not the case here. Italy against Ireland gave us quite the match. They had, there were a lot of positives for Italian rugby to be seen, also with their under-20s. And I know we discussed this, but there is a real curve coming with Italian rugby at the moment, and it's an upward one. So I certainly do think we are going to see a very good match with a Italy that are building in confidence, and a Welsh team that, look, the planned strike didn't go ahead, and they did obviously play England in what was a very drab match to watch. And I just think Italy at home with the Azzurri faithful out, it's a tough place for Wales to go. It was a tough place for Ireland to go. I think it'll be a really tough place for Wales to go.
Agree. I'm with you on that. I think Wales have the beating of them, but it depends on which Welsh team. This is so cliched. It is cliched. Which Welsh team turns up, and I do think
it completely does. We also then have, as a Dragons fan, I can say they had a really great game with Connacht last night, but they're not. A lot of their players there weren't internationals who were going off against the Azzurri, obviously. We do also, obviously, we'll get to Ireland and Scotland in a minute. England are a team who are now improving. The French are a side who may have their tails between their legs somewhat. And it's a big match for France. And I just think, I think the English they're starting to grow in a bit of confidence again, because they're Steve Borthwick, you're starting to see the seeds of what he's doing. Do I think they're a long way off being England at the highs of their time with Eddie Jones? Yes, I think they're a long way off that. But do I think they're growing in confidence? Yes. So that's another good game. Ireland and Scotland is obviously the most pivotal game of the weekend. And I think for Ireland, it is an absolutely huge match. They will have players returning from injury, which is obviously good. No substantial injury concerns coming out from the last game other than Finlay Bealham. And I think obviously Scotland will have at least one player facing a ban who will be out as a result of the red card in the last match. But I think it is, and I should also mention that will also affect France, because their player has been banned after he also got a red card in the Scotland match. But I think Ireland-Scotland is going to be, we saw how porous Ireland were at times in their defence. They obviously will have Gary Ringrose coming back in, which will be very important to them, and the 12 and 13 channel will be back to its normal axis. But I think the Italians, strangely, were the team who showed how penetrable the Irish defence can be at times. And when you have a team like Scotland coming up against you, when you Hogg and you have, like, they're going to be running at you, Van der Merwe, it's a very different proposition than the Italians. And the Italians, while they were good, I think it's going to be a match where Ireland really need to be at their best, because I think the psychological damage of losing to Scotland when they've been cresting on this wave going towards the World Cup later this year, I think it would be more damaging for Ireland to lose than it would be a boost for Scotland to win, if that makes sense. It's much more negative for Ireland if they were to lose than it would be significant.
Look, if we look at it rationally and also being very, very fair about it, Scotland are a good team. They were playing a lovely, even last week, they were playing a lovely offloading game. Sometimes it's like, honestly, I thought, this is like watching Fiji play. They were being...
The hands, just fantastic.
Yeah, lovely
quick
hands.
movement.
Yeah, and like you're going into contact and then offloading the ball one hand, but they had runners coming through. Now, Ireland, of course, you said they will be stronger. They will have their players back, so they're going to be, a little bit more confident. But at the same time, yeah, I think it's going to be very, very tough. And if you look at the table, I was looking at the table earlier on today, this morning actually, and thinking Wales are in the wooden spoon. They're in sixth place. They're in last place. They have minus 62 points. This is terrible for Wales. If they lose to France, they lose to Italy, that's it. They're done for. They're finished.
Let's think about how their year started. And obviously they've had crushing defeats since last year, since before Warren came in. And I just don't know if the magic they seem to associate with Warren is actually going to come good.
Yeah. I have to say, Warren Gatland, I mean, he got a raw deal in Ireland, set up by his Sullivan set him up. So I think he had a tough time when he was coach of Ireland. He was very much in love with Ireland. I mean, Ireland was his place, and he was very fond of the country. He was betrayed by the people around him. He wasn't given a good enough chance, even though they were developing. And suddenly, the guy he handed over to, Eddie O'Sullivan, they took off. So and so there was that. I don't know, but still, yeah. So you're going. Who are you going for? Okay, so Italy over Wales.
I'm going Italy. I am going England, and I'm going to be patriotic and hopeful. Cross my fingers and say Ireland.
Okay.
Even though Murray feels a tough place to go.
Okay, so on that, we are going to go into a very, very tiny little break with a new logo, thanks to Double N, of course, our wonderful colleague who is, long story, he'll be on us actually in a week's time, so we're looking forward to seeing him. So we're going to a break and coming back then with our very special guest reading, Brian Wesaala, all the way from Kenya. So back in just a few seconds. And just like that, here he is. Brian, you look magnificent. No, this isn't the right way. You look tribal.
What do you mean by I look tribal? Just I decided to wear my African shirt. I think it's the only one I have in my wardrobe.
Because I say that because when I met you in Moscow a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now, 4 years ago, 2019.
Yeah, it's almost 4 years.
2019. And when you're up with us in Moscow, and like you said, like, it was funny. We were standing on stage, actually got an award, and you said to me, you said, I really like. You said, but I think I should have maybe worn something tribal. You told me that on the stage. So
I can't remember that. It was a very, if I can say, surreal moment for me to be there in 2019. It's good to see you again, Alan, and thank you for the invitation.
Listen, I'm delighted to have you on. It's a long way we wanted to do this before, but now we have you. Brian, okay, the Football Foundation for Africa, tell us about it. Tell us what you do, because I gave a bit of an intro about how you're rebuilding footballers' lives. There's a great story behind why you set it up. It came from a tragedy, but it means a huge amount and has done a great deal. So the floor is yours. Tell us why you set up the foundation, because you were busy, you were in Switzerland at the time. Why you set up the foundation and what you're doing?
I really don't like to dwell on the tragedy, especially now, but always glad to share. The tragedy is I lost a good friend of mine who was a footballer, a teammate at the time. That was in January 2015. So he lost his life in Dar es Salaam under very tragic circumstance. He was actually gunned down, and that's when it kind of hit me that probably I need to live a more purposeful life. As you have rightly mentioned, I was living in Geneva then. I was doing IT. That's my career, my training. But I think I was just kind of stuck in the motion of things. You go to work. Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, enjoy my weekends. But at this moment, I decided to live more purposeful. I can say that. And the following year, in 2016, when I was visiting Kenya, I decided to organize a tournament, more like a get together, to bring my friends together, the people I had played with football, because I had been away from the country for some time, even though I visited quite regularly. And from this tournament is when I realized, despite the fact that I had been able to develop my career more or less, a lot of the people I played with, a lot of the players that I interacted with were not really doing much. They had decided to pursue football as a career, and as the situation is in Africa, it's very difficult to realize a professional career in football. And it's at this moment that I decided I need to do something about this. And the following year, I decided to do the tournament again. That was 2017, but this time expand it a bit and give it a theme, which is tackling unemployment through sport. And I was trying to tell, especially amateur footballers, young people, that yeah, it's okay to pursue a career in football. But while you're at it, I think football is a great platform to build your social capital and to connect you to different opportunities within the sport and outside. So it was with this in mind that I started to see how do I bring especially corporates back closer to the game, because over time I had realized in Africa not many corporates are sponsoring football. Like you see here in Europe. And then after this tournament in 2017 is when I thought, man, I think I can do something more with this, because so I just to pull you back a bit, I'd also started to before that to research a lot around football and how the whole ecosystem works. So after this tournament in 2017, which I pushed through my blog, brianwesaala.com, I saw there was a lot of interest in what I was doing, what I had been writing, and these tournaments now. I did some crowdfunding and was able to finance the whole thing. And I said, let me see what more can I do. And I remember on my trip back to Geneva, where I was based, I decided, when I get to Geneva, I'm going to set up the Football Foundation for Africa, and that's what I want to do with I won't say the rest of my life, but a good chunk of my life. I want to invest myself back into football and see how I can build a more sustainable uh, football ecosystem in Africa. So yeah, that's how I got to set up the FFA. I got to Geneva, got to my laptop. I wrote down the concept note of what I was going to do, shared it with a few people, made the decision that I was going to leave my job in Geneva. I was not going to renew my contract. And yeah, if it didn't happen in Geneva, I was also ready. I'll say I'm going to relocate back to Nairobi and build what I feel was my dream. Like that's what I was meant to do.
Now, I mentioned, of course, promo the show that it's award winning, and that's how we met. You won a global award for best social project, correct?
Yes.
And I mean, the people at the awards that night, I mean, they were phenomenal. I mean, there was the elite of the elite from the playing and coaching side from around the world. I think Francesco Totti was there, wasn't he?
Yep, I think that's one of the biggest moments in my life, meeting Francesco Totti. And I remember I just walked into the room. I'd been delayed for 5 hours at the airport.
I remember.
So you remember that, and I walked into the room, and I remember when I got the news that I was going to get this award. My only I didn't even, not in a bad way, but I didn't care much about the award because I knew Toti was going to be there. I said I have to get a picture with Toti. That was my dream when I was going there. And I get to the room, I enter the room, and I'm told you're going to go up on stage next, like immediately. And they say to present this award is Francesco Totti. And I think at that moment it was just like, Brian, you're doing the right thing. Whatever you're doing, I think you're on the right track. And I got up on stage, and you were there, and we exchanged a bit. And it's really a great moment to speak to that crowd, as you say, of elite people, and talk about the real situation of African football. Sometimes we lose so much. Um, how can I put it? We focus so much on the elite sport and all that glory, the EPL, the big leagues. But when you look at Africa, especially, and you go down to the grassroots and you realize how much dreams we are selling to people and how these dreams are failing to materialize for young people, then you realize we need to have another conversation about football and how we position the game, especially for young people.
That's exactly it. And I'm going to as Isel's going to ask you a question. We also have a message from a friend of yours, Chris Chimano, says Nairobi locked. Now, locked in Ireland means a completely different thing. It's not a good thing. It means that you're quite drunk. So that's like a celebration in Nairobi. Just going to share a screen as Isla starts to ask her question, and just to give people a flavor of that night. Because again, when I say that there was like delete to delete, I was. It was a weird thing. They had the presenters, and they're like, "Alan, will you present?" I'm like, it's better not to present, and I didn't end up presenting. We ended up asking. We had a brilliant format. I mean, it was a great night. But Isel, fire away, and I'll just run across the screen right now so people can actually see what's happening. If I can, wait, hold on, that's the wrong one. Okay, oh. Isel, sorry, fire away.
So I'm going to talk away. Brian, it was just such a lovely introduction and explanation, and I think it's so important for people to not just associate sports and the benefit of sports with being the elite level. I've actually noticed, and it's just something you reminded me of when you were speaking, in the last week in Ireland, there has been a new ad put out by one of the sponsors of our Irish rugby team, where the ad shows you one of the big name players at the start, and then it continues to show you, like, these are fictional people, but they show you a woman in coaching the underage team and a man who does a club website. And the idea is that the heart of our Irish team and the team that we see on the elite level is all the people who get those players to that level and all the people who never reach that level. It's the community and the grassroots, and it's so, so important. So I suppose my question to you, because I'm sure you're sick of being asked this because people, it seems a common topic, but how did you adjust and pivot with everything during the COVID period, and how did that affect how you were operating?
Yeah, COVID was interesting. I remember January 2020, we did the 5th edition of Obama Cup. That's the tournament that we used to organize, tackling unemployment through sport. And then we started to hear rumors about this disease somewhere in China, and we didn't take much interest. And my India just moved back to Nairobi from Geneva, like the previous year. So March 2019, I moved back to Nairobi. I was all set to organize grassroots football tournaments. That was going to be my focus. And then COVID hit, and we could no longer do anything physically. Can't organize tournaments. It kind of threw me into a spin because now I had to quickly rethink, what am I going to do? And for 2-3 months, it was very difficult to just think, okay, I'm back in Nairobi. I don't have a job. Now there is COVID. I was trying to build this business organization, but that can't happen now. And I think that time, like, the whole world changed. Especially there was a lot of online activity. They say there was that transformation that happened because of COVID. We realized we could use platforms like these, StreamYard, to get information across. But something came up came to me, and there was so much sports webinars, educational programs online. But I realized all this was coming from Europe or the global north, because that's where they've really understood the business of sport and how it works. When you talk about these are the people who make the careers of these elite players. Those are jobs, and that was being discussed online. And I looked at Africa, and there was nothing coming from Africa. And that's when I decided to start doing the Africa Football Business Show. And the idea was to educate and inspire people in the industry to think beyond the pitch. What else happens outside of the pitch? And I say COVID was a blessing in disguise for the Football Foundation for Africa, because of the African Football Business Show, I was able to build the FFA brand to what it is now, like gain really good global traction, and at the same time remain very relevant and stick to my strategy, which is again promote education around the business of sports. And until now, we've run, I think, 5 seasons now, almost 50 episodes of the Africa Football Business Show. I think, and the highlight, of course, last year, I managed to interview Arsene Wenger, which again was just like, wow. And this was a blind email. I know the FIFA email format, so I wrote to Wenger and said, I want to invite you to come and speak to us about African football because he has this passion. And I got a response. And it was a great moment as well for me personally and for the organization. And as I said, that's how we actually survived. That's how I survived COVID. That's how we survived COVID. We managed to grow through that period of COVID because of the Africa Football Business Show.
That is absolutely brilliant.
I'll ask a question and you jump in, and we'll move on to the last little part of the show with Brian. But I'm going to play a clip in just a moment because something we discussed on, and we've really gone into it. You mentioned about like the global north. I hate to see divides, but I speak about it all the time with colleagues in India, and when I worked at the university before, and speaking with people from around the world, and how they viewed it. I never see, as you know, from we've met, and I don't see the difference in people. We're all the same, but there is that kind of divide. We discussed it in depth around the World Cup of Qatar. The kind of I'll be very honest and say, like, what we said, Isol said, I said, and many of our guests said as well, just kind of sneering and laughing and kind of belittling, kind of disgusting is kind of like Arabs, it's not white people, and so on. What's your view on that? Do you think that there is this kind of systemic, as we were told by an Iranian Swede, is systemic racism within football? Does that exist? Because you've been in the heart of Europe, in Switzerland, but in football, is there systemic racism, or is actually football getting past it?
I think racism goes beyond football, and I don't want to, we tend to ascribe too much to football. I'm a football lover. I love football, but I think sometimes we overplay football. Systemic racism is there. We all know the history of the world and how things have developed. Speaking from an African context, we know about the slave trade, we know about the colonial era, we know all this, but things are developing and things are changing. But we'll always have to deal with these issue of racism. For me, I usually tell people the best way to deal with racism is not just to speak about it, but it's also up to, for example, those who feel disadvantaged, be it Indians, Arabs, and in this case, Africans, to build their own institution, to build their own personality so that they're able to contribute positively to that global conversation in whatever field. And if you talk about football, Football is just an amplifier. You know, if there's racism in society and there's a racist act within the football, it just amplifies because the whole world is focused on football.
Yeah.
So it's not that there is a special kind of racism in football. It's just football amplifies whatever happens in society. And I think I made a comment recently or somewhere on LinkedIn. You know, we always play this, oh, football is unites us, football unites the world. I think that kind of rhetoric as well is misinformed. You know, if we are working towards uniting the world, then football can amplify that message. But if we're not, if we're doing something negative like racism or divisive politics, again, football will find a way of amplifying that message. I don't know if that answers your question.
No,
And
that's
It
brilliant.
does.
that's
That's
that's how
that.
that's how I
Yeah,
look
It's
at it.
it's completely a lens through which we see it, and because we see football on our screens, when we see acts of racism, and we discussed one last week to do with a match, um, when we see them on our screens, they're brought into our homes. But that is only reflective of if these people are going to football matches and behaving in that manner, they're doing it outside football as well, because football is just the lens through which we see it. But it's so important that if we're going to say we're going to use sport as a way of uniting people or trying to stamp things out, because we constantly see the message stamp out, football says no to racism, stamp out racism. It needs to be a societal way of approaching it. And if we
Yeah.
see it at football grounds, hopefully we will see it outside football grounds with people taking positive steps.
yeah.
I know today, you were just after reminding me of something today, Brian, and we were watching the Man United Liverpool match. And the other Brian, who was in the house with me watching the match earlier, he said there was an announcement on the screen at the match. And he said that's them telling them that they can't do any of the chants about football tragedies. So Munich, and basically telling the fans not to. And I was like, you shouldn't have to tell people don't chant about dead supporters. And that's the world we live in. So I think, it's football sometimes can bring out the worst side in people as well, unfortunately, the group mentality, but that's just reflective of society, unfortunately, at times.
We had a sports fan, and especially for cycling as well, Richard Boxon, and he's a boxing specialist last week from England, and a very, very frank discussion about what he heard. For example, we discussed what we heard in football matches. He came up with this idea, and I'm going to ask both of you, because Isel, you were just coming off before Rich said this, and Brian, I'll ask Isel first, and then you give your opinion on this. What he said can be done or should be done for people who decide that someone is worth less to them or someone is less of a person than they are, and they use abusive language or they abuse them, that this is the best way to deal with it. And this is in his opinion.
It just goes round and round. I had a conversation last year with a pal of mine who was actually at Sheffield United, and one of the players got some racist abuse on Instagram. Really good player, David McGoldrick, is at Derby County. Irish international, yeah. And he got some racist abuse on Instagram or something like that. So it all came out on social media and club news. And I spoke to a kid who actually works for an agency, and I went, the way to stop all this is what I do. This is on Planet Poxon. Is that whoever sent that tweet, threw that banana, did whatever at that level, and it's racial harassment or whatever, they should be made to go and sit in a room with the player and his family, whether that family is his wife, his mum and dad, his two little daughters or two little sons at 7-year-old, and say, right, go on then, mate, we're all here together now. Why did you call me a black whatever, or why did you call me a Irish whatever, or why did you go on, just explain. My mum and dad are here with me, or my girlfriend, or my two little kids. Just talk me through why you did that. If you had to face that level of shame, not being on social media or for the media, if you had to go in a room as a grown adult, now imagine me as a 50-year-old man having to go and sit across from a plane going, one of his kids sat on his knees, and his mum and his girlfriend sat outside him going, yeah, well, I did call you this, and yeah, I did send you that, and it'd be absolute. To a normal human being, it'd be mortifying. And to me, the only way to do it is to shame people. And I think the best way to shame them is you have to face up for what you've said.
Isolt, Is that the way to go? Is that one way to put someone across? It's easy to throw a banana at someone on the field, or to call them a Jewish whatever it is from the stand. But if you have to stand across from them, suddenly you're not such a hard person after all.
I actually, strangely, this week you've timed this very well. I've listened to, as we all know from my legal side, I love an old law podcast, and I've listened to a few discussing various ways of restorative justice, and also where you have victims of crime meet with the perpetrators after the event. And I went down a rabbit hole in the last week of listening to a number of these. And that's basically what you're suggesting there is you put someone in a room and you say, you did X. If it's one individual, yes. If it's obviously a group being selected out from a crowd for chance, that makes it very impractical to actually do that. But I think this is the big thing. Where you have individuals who are doing things like that, it's either from a solid basis that they have grown up in an environment where racism is treated as acceptable, or the culture in which they're immersed, that is seen as acceptable behavior because they're being cheered on by people around them when they act out like that. Whereas I think if you put someone in a one-on-one situation, it makes it very difficult for people to justify their behavior to themselves. But I also think the big thing with any of this behavior is the consequences. The consequences need to be extremely stern on these individuals. We saw today again in the, it wasn't a racist incident, but we saw a fan run onto the field in Anfield as the Liverpool fans were celebrating one of their goals, and Jurgen Klopp was obviously going absolutely apoplectic because he was so annoyed at this fan turning up on the field, and he will get a ban from Anfield probably for life. He will never attend another Liverpool match. We need to have that attitude across the board. If anyone interferes with play, whether it's through racist or abusive chants or behaviour, we need to stamp them out of the game. But that doesn't mean we can't also make them sit down in a room and explain their behaviour and also hear the consequences of their behaviour and the effect it has on players, on their families who may be in the stands sitting beside these people who are doing this. It's very important.
Brian, you heard from Easel and from Rich Poxon there as well. Does it make sense to do that? The people have to actually speak across from each other. Will that work? Or do we need a deeper dive into society? Is it one step at a time, or just one big wave to sweep away the insanity?
I mean, just to support what Isol has just said. I mean that it's not really it's not it's I mean it's one way of doing it, but it's not practical. If it's coming from a group, so how do you make them all sit down in a room with this player with you? But you get the gist of what he is trying to say. I think it's a matter of education. Our people who are perpetrators of these racist attitudes, also because like again, Isola said, they have grown up in an environment where they kind of feel this is okay, or it has been normalized. So they're not exposed to anything different. So it's an issue of education. These people need to be educated about why things are the way they are, and why whatever they're doing is wrong in this case. So using different platforms, using whatever initiatives. It's about education. Just to put it bluntly, racism usually you find it, especially when it comes to football space, it's perpetrated by um, middle class European white people, and it's because they have grown up in a system where they know other, in this case Africa, inferior continent in the scale, people coming from there, but they don't even understand their own history because they have not been taught their own history about why the world is the way it is and why this particular geography population looks disadvantaged. If they come to understand that, then perhaps their attitude will change and they will be able to behave or act differently. So yeah, this kind of shaming or sit in a room, it's not practical. It's doable, but it's not practical to address the situation. But if you look at the motive behind it, is it's to educate that person, if if I sit across with you, Alan, if I sit with you, I begin to understand who you are and where you're coming from. And it's only in that way that I start to respect you. But if you've never met, you don't know who Brian is, or you've never taken time to listen to Brian, then your only information about this person is perhaps what you see on media or what you hear from people, which does not really give you a holistic perspective of the world. So a real educational effort should happen in those populations that perpetrate racism.
That's very, like, from our point of view, because we see people as everyone is the same, everyone should have equal rights, and treat people as you meet them. But as you're right, like, one-on-one can work only in certain circumstances. And it's something that I yesterday was noticing. I was reading news reports on Emmanuel Macron in Africa. He was running around and saying, "Oh, we have no longer any colonies. We're going to move our soldiers out." And he went to Angola, and I was thinking, wait, Angola, and because I'm, student of geography and history, it's like, wait, Angola was a Portuguese colony, but so it's this kind of weird thing of like, oh no, we're all okay. And every time he went, he was in, I think it was the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. He started saying, "Oh, like, it's nice." I think he said something like, "It's very nice to see a fair election in Africa." And like the Congolese president took him up and just destroyed him on it. It was just like, God, did someone not tell him not to say it? Like, it was just a kind of a. And Emmanuel Macron is definitely not a racist. He's a very open person. He's a very educated person and very traveled person. It was his 18th trip as president to Africa, but he still was able to say silly things. So even with education, there's still a kind of like, slipper. This kind of is ingrained. Brian, before we go away, of course, we do have to mention Manchester United getting actually hockey today, 7-0 by Liverpool. Horrible for them. Great for Liverpool there after moving up the table. Arsenal, of course, winning 3-2 against Bournemouth yesterday. I won't mention Spurs because that was not good, going down 1-0 to Wolves. West Ham, of course, losing to Brighton as well. The Premier League standings right now, Arsenal, of course, still top 5 points ahead, but level on games now with Man City. United have a game in hand, but they are 14 points back.
And Alan appears to have frozen.
Yep.
So at this point, we're going to discuss Man United and Liverpool.
I'm not going to say what's your team.
It's back.
Yes. Did I disappear?
You froze.
Froze.
It was a lovely minute.
Froze. There you go. It's very cold where I am. It's very, very cold. It's about -2, so I did freeze. Brian, outside of Kenya, what is your team?
Arsenal.
Isolt is Spurs. That's why she's putting her head down.
Look, every team is better than us right now. So, it's been a bad week. Last week we had Rich on, who is a Sheffield fan, and he was joking about Sheffield beating Spurs. They did. Arsenal, they came back today to clutch a win from the jaws of defeat. Well, the jaws of a draw. So, everyone is doing well at the moment. Spurs are on a downward spiral, and hopefully Man United will continue to join us on their downward spiral. One game.
Brian, you've grown up. Obviously, you're a fan before Arsene Wenger, but what was it like speaking with Arsene Wenger? I've seen this, by the way. I've seen the interview. It's terrific. Brian did a superb job. The African Football Business Show is great. If anyone wants to just sit down and have a look at something to learn, just to listen to different voices from around the world, absolutely fabulous. But what was it like interviewing someone who you would see as someone who was I won't say an idol, but someone was he would have inspired a lot of people because of the way he treated football and treated his team, and how he was a winner. He never gave up, and he always was consistently good. How was it like to interview him?
It's an excellent experience for me, and actually I started supporting Arsenal around 1997, 1996. So in the Wenger era, and the naive me actually thought there was a link between Arsene and Arsenal then. So That's how close I am to Wenger. So, and I've also admired him as a manager and how he thinks about football. So he's one of the people that I have tried to understand how he thinks. And for him, especially when it comes to management of players, it was a purely, he takes a very economic perspective, which I think is something that should be encouraged. And I was keen to talk to him, especially because of his uh, love for African talent. I mean, he gave us the only African Ballon d'Or winner to date, George Weah. And he seems to have these, you know, special uh, link with Africa. So it was amazing. Like I said, I just sent an email, like a cold email, and I was actually inviting him to come for the summit. I see the picture there, but I say, I don't have. I would be busy. I think he was traveling to New Zealand then, but I'm happy to give a video interview, and that was just amazing. And he works with a very good assistant, I must say, who was also very helpful. And the whole interaction for me was like one of those living your dream kind of. It's not every day you get to interview Arsene Wenger, but then again, talking to him, I realized he's a very open person. Like, it's very, very engaging. And these are kind of the qualities I admire, for example, in people outside of the image you have of some of these global personalities. It's good when you just realize these people also just have a human side to them, and they would like to speak to Brian as well. And when you're interviewing him and he actually says Brian, like you're saying Brian, and you feel you feel good. It was a good feeling. Yeah.
That's great to hear. That's a great way to end off our show as well tonight. Thank you so much, Brian. Brian, listen, will you come back on again in a few weeks if you have free time?
Sure. I'm always happy to speak, and I mean, we also have an interesting connection with Russia, Moscow, where we met. I still need to come back there because I only spent 2 days. I think 40. I
Yeah.
was doing a 48-hour visa, which is some of the things that sometimes we need to address. And I spent 5 of those hours at the airport because they could not believe he has been invited to receive an award, and they were just looking at and it was
Yeah.
a whole. So I think I need another trip to Russia, of course.
You do for sure.
Hopefully the situation improves for the better, and I'll be happy to come back. But yeah, pleasure speaking to you, Alan, and pleasure to meet you as well. It's a great conversation. I
It,
hope we connect more.
it has been an
And,
absolute joy.
and look, Issa, I love how you got your name right away.
I know. No one does that. I'm like, they're going, oh, this is great.
Right, everyone makes her name a whole range of. It's an old Irish name, and it's so many people don't get it right, even in Ireland. So when I heard you saying, like, referencing Issa, I'm going, whoa, he got that right. That's pretty good. So that's why you have to come back on again in a few weeks' time.
I'm starting to think I didn't ask for the pronunciation at the beginning, but probably lucky guess. Thank you.
No,
Yeah,
it's a great job.
Yeah.
An educated guest. That's what it was. So that's. So Brian, on that note, thank you very much, Issa. Thank you very, very much. I'll see you next week again. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Nico.
guys.
Thank you very much. Nice.
Okay, and again, all the information you can find at footballfoundation.africa. Look it up. Look into what they're doing. Follow them on social media as well. Listen to the podcast. Listen to what Brian's doing, because this is something that should be replicated around the world, because it is something that's extremely good for society, extremely good for footballers, and for people who basically, after football, they kind of lose their way a little bit, or even going into football, they're not sure what they're going to do. This is a great structure to be able to put in place for these people to be better people in the end. So thank you again, Brian. Thank you again, Issa. And Issa, see you next week. Brian, see you in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you.
All right. Cheers, Al. Bye.
And on that note, I will go out and say good night to you all, and thank you for joining us this evening. Of course, it was a very interesting show. We had Isolt as our awesome co-host, and actually gave us the rundown of Conor Ben, I should say. And yeah, so we will go out into the lovely night, and of course, we're back next week with some more Capital Sports 3.0. Hope you enjoyed it, and of course, like, subscribe, share. Let us know what you think. We had some brilliant feedback from people today. Thank you so much for everyone who watched us. And yeah, so my name is Alan Moore, saying take care of yourselves and each other. See you all next week.